Greetings, my Israelite brothers and sisters, heirs, joint heirs, adopted, grafted, natural, spiritual. I hope that this video finds you all well. Let me fix my little holder here. If it falls, I'm still safe. It's just a stopper that you just kind of push in and it holds down. Just waiting for a few of you all to log in and all of that good stuff. But I do hope that everybody's well. So as I always start out, I always say, greetings, my Israelite brothers and sisters, heirs, joint heirs, adopted, grafted, natural, and spiritual. Wow. I don't know if I want to go that way because it looks like an accident, but I want to go anyway. So to most of you, I want to say greetings to most of you, and all of you I'm saying greetings. I'm just looking to see if this is the best route to take, so just give me 1 second here. I want to make sure I'm taking the best possible route. Okay, so I'm fine now. Oh, really? So somebody decided to make a U-turn. Yeah, so other than that, all is well. I wanted to, first of all, bring something to your attention that I'm inclined to do on Friday night. Hello, Miss B. Hello, Brother Tobiah. Again, if my stopper fails down, I've been having problems with it. Everything's okay. I'll just have to pick the phone up and put it back. That's it. So I've been reading on some material, and for Friday night, I think there's a strong need for a particular lesson that I want to do. On Friday night, I really missed you all because I was, again, out of town. But it's glad to be back, and I'm back in full swing of things to the point that I'm getting my lesson ready for Friday night. I've been reading up on something, and I think on Friday night we're going to have a discussion. Of course, in everything that we do with Bible study, I have to have some scriptures, so I will have some scriptures. But I think that going into a new decade, being 2020, when you're out of town, you have a chance to do reading on just material, but magazines, you're sitting there, you just kind of read, it allows me to catch up on things, to kind of break the trend of what I normally do. And I was reading on three different sources of a subject, and I'm going to tell you what it is in a second. And I looked at it and I said to myself, man, we're going into 2020. I see the trend changing. We're going to have to jump on this. So the buzzword out there is diversity inclusion training. Diversity inclusion training. Now, if you recall, there used to be what we call, back in the day, when there was training that one would have to do on culture diversity. And that's when there was a lot of stuff going on, discrimination, what have you, and all of that. And they called it, everybody all of a sudden had to have culture diversity training. Another training that was a hot topic out there is during the days of the O.J. Simpson trial, there was domestic violence training. Um, so when I was sitting around, I came across the same subject in three different sources, and it was diversity inclusion. And it was talking about this training is taking place in workplaces. It's taking place with contractors who have government contracts with a certain amount of employees. It's taking place in schools. And I started to look at this, and I saw the subject, diversity inclusion. Then I read something else because the subject itself, the title itself, did not really ring a bell with me. And then I was looking at another periodical and I saw the same subject, diversity, inclusion. Um, and so I went back to the very first source that I had, magazine, and I started to say, man, what is this subject? And uh, diversity inclusion is this, it's the old diversity training where you work with different people from different ethnic groups, and it's how to not to say anything offensive that will say anything that will offend somebody of a different diverse group other than yourself. And so certain things you just could not say. And so to make sure that people understood culture diversity, they have this training, so that you'll know that certain things may be offensive. And they would have training on apples and oranges, and just because there's a bunch of apples in the room and you got one orange, at the end of the day, they were all fruit. So that's how they went through that training. They didn't make it a black, white, or Hispanic issue. The even the training itself was very sensitive. So they used fruit. So it was just interesting in all of itself. So I thought that was interesting. But the new buzzword is inclusion. Inclusion. So I started looking and said, okay, I know what diversity is. What is this inclusion? So the inclusion is the Rainbow Coalition groups, the LGBT. I hope I didn't leave a letter out. LGBT. And that's what the inclusion is. So now it's called diversity inclusion. So I'm sitting there and I read the next article and I read the next article. And the third periodical that I picked up, it was dealing with schools. And I thought that was interesting. And I looked at what they were doing, or at least what was being recommended to be done in all schools. And they wanted to start as early as first grade to have this diversity inclusion. And I'm thinking to myself, how do you train someone in first grade regarding diversity inclusion? Because in culture diversity training, when it was a hot topic back in the day, it was never included in grade school. It was never brought up. It was never a part of the mandatory agenda. Never put on the table. You got it in the workplace. And the reason why you got it in the workplace is because that's where the lawsuits were taking place, where people would say, I feel like that they're discriminating against me. I think that certain things were stated. Of course, the male-female issue was brought up, where men or women felt like that things were being stated, pictures that was placed up was offensive. And so Um, I'm dealing with a police officer who's directing traffic, and he forgot this traffic. And, I guess they get screwed up too. I'm asking myself, why is this type of training, diversity, inclusion, why are we now incorporating first, second, third graders into this training? It should be a workplace training. Why are we bringing our kids into it? And I ask myself, what type of training would this be? Now that I understood what inclusion was and what category, what group of people that they wanted in the inclusion doctrine. And I said, okay, but how do you explain it to a child? How do you break that down? And what need? And as I went on reading, I discovered that there were several cases throughout the country where there were kids in certain grades who were dealing with, and I'm trying to use the proper word so nobody takes it out of context. They were dealing with gender identity. They had gender identity challenges. I got to write that word down. Gender identity challenges. And so I said, okay, wow. Okay, so that was interesting. And so I said to myself, we have kids who are Christian based or biblical based, however you choose to call it. I don't want to get involved with the semantics of that. But I said this will be a good discussion on Friday night Bible study. A good discussion. How do we properly train our children? How do we, because it's happening. It's going to happen. It could have already been happening right now. And because my daughter's in a private school, I don't know that it's happening. But it's not about me, because as a pastor, you're for the masses. So I said, we need to have a discussion on how do we prepare our children to be prepared for the training. How do you prepare your child who you're growing up and you're raising in a biblical-based foundation? How do you prepare them to be exposed to the training? How do you prepare them to be trained, knowing that they're going to be trained, or they're going to be exposed to diversity inclusion training? Diversity inclusion training. Adults, we're good. We expect for jobs and to say, listen, we need to have this training to let people know that, okay, we get that. But children, even sex education was held back until high school. Sex education was held back. Then, back in the early 2000s, they decided, since there were so many kids in junior high, being 7th, 8th, 9th grade, that was getting pregnant, maybe perhaps we need to bring that curriculum earlier into the education system. So I get it. I got that. Okay. So sex education was brought, instead of getting it in 10th grade, you started getting it in 7th grade. Okay, so I got that. But, and you at least by the 7th grade, when it came to sex education, the parents should have had some sort of discussion. I mean, you don't have to prepare your child to get sex education training in school, okay? In 10th grade, you definitely did not have to expose your child or prepare them for the exposure of having sex education in school, okay? It was a shock. I remember getting I remember getting it. It was a shock that I was like embarrassed that, you're talking about male parts and female parts, and there's us in school, because we were the first. I was in my era, we were the first to get it. And it was like, wow, and you're sitting there, you got all these emotional, somewhat feelings against, with somebody next, sitting in the seat beside you, and they're giving you this training. It was a little rough. And it would have been good to have a little bit more awareness at home, okay? But moving forward, we're in a new decade. We're in 2020. So basically, society is forcing us to bring sex education, culture diversity, diversity inclusion to the table with a first grader. So the subject on Friday night is going to be, how do you prepare them? What do you tell them? I'm sure that some of us have not even brought up the biblical perspective to our children when it comes to diversity inclusion, LGBT. We haven't even brought that to our children. I'm talking about those that are strong, biblically foundation-based families, okay? So, but I'm telling you, we're having the subject on Friday night. We're going to have the topic. I'm going to get some scriptures together, but we're going to have the subject on Friday night and say, how do you expose, or how do you prepare your child for the training that they're going to get, to the exposure, how they're going to get. I'm really curious as to how they're going to present the subject. Because again, back in the 90s, when cultural diversity was a hot subject and it had to be brought to the table, they used fruit as an analogy. They used fruit as an analogy instead of using races of people. And it was very creative. I thought it was good. And they would use something like, okay, if you're on your job and there's one orange in the group and everybody's apples, you must keep in mind that you're dealing with fruit and everybody must have an equal opportunity. You can't pick a person because an apple cannot pick all apples because they're used to dealing with apples. You have to have a better reason. And you must look at the fact that all fruit is fruit. And that's how they went about their training. Very sensitive. Culture, even dealing with cultural diversity as a subject, the subject was sensitive. They were very sensitive. That was another word they used to call it, sensitivity training. Sensitivity training was one that covered male, female, and different culture groups. So they call it sensitivity training. It went from culture diversity training to sensitivity training to all of that, because it also included age. Sensitivity training included age. So you can't tell somebody, it was offensive to say that, hey, you're just an old fart or you got old ways. You couldn't tell somebody that because it would be offensive to say that. You couldn't be in a meeting and say something like, yeah, well, see, you guys don't, y'all still dealing with typewriters. You don't understand the internet. That would be offensive. And that's the type of training that we got, awareness that we got in sensitivity training. Everybody, every employee. It was a policy. People enacted, business, corporations, institutions, whatever, no matter what kind of institution, across the board, there was policies that was implemented, and included in the policy was the fact that you got trained, you got signed off on it, the whole ball of wax. Harassment, sexual harassment, all of that. But the new one now is diversity inclusion. Diversity inclusion. And it's LGBT based. That's what the subject is. And so in the periodical, the magazine that I read, it was about bringing that training to children as early as the first grade. As early as the first grade. So we that are biblically based families, we need, I feel, to have the discussion. How do you prepare your children for it? You got to bring the scriptures into it. You can't let it be one perspective. You have to prepare your children. You have to let your children know what the biblical foundations are. And I think it's your right to let your child know. Okay? But I think at some point in time, you have to have the discussion with your child that that we may have a biblical-based perspective, but reality of it is it exists. So how do you go about sharing with a first grader, male or female? How do you go about explaining to them that this exists? And I can tell you, my daughter is 9 years old. My wife and I have had the conversation with her. The school has never brought it up, but we've had the conversation because we may take a family trip to the mall. And going to the mall, you could see anything. You might see anything from cashiers to anything, you know. I mean, there's no limitation. There's no limitation to what you may see when you go to a public mall. There is no limitation. If you can think of it, you will see it. I mean, we have seen young boys with fingernail polish on. And my daughter, you know, she's very cool. You know, she's very cool when she sees something strange. Because when we walk in the mall as a family, you know, my wife is holding, my daughter's in the middle, and we're on each side of her. We all just kind of hold hands. And what my daughter does, she has a little Caribbean DNA in her, and she'll squeeze our hands. And people from the islands, they never point, but what they'll do is they go like this, like that. So you'll look down at them because they squeeze their hand, they squeeze your hand, and when you look down to see what it is, they never point. They'll just turn their head toward the direction that they want you to look, and they go. And that's island people. So my wife has a Trinidad background, DNA background. So I guess that's just an inherent trait because she never taught that to my daughter. She never taught it to her. She just picked it up somehow. But anyway, so my daughter, we were sitting there and she saw something strange. She just saw something that, based upon being raised in a biblical based foundation home, she saw something that was just totally strange. And she wanted us to see. And, and it happened like 3 times in that one evening. And so we really decided, man, we got to have that conversation with her. We have to have that conversation to let her know that this is the society that we live in, and this is what you're going to see. You're going to see these things. You're going to see people. And I even told her, I said, listen, a key word is when somebody says my partner, my partner. When they say that, what that means. And so she said, oh, okay. I said, whereas, people Christian-based will say my wife or my husband, whereas people who have other choices, they may say my partner. And so you have to be careful. You really have to. You got to educate your children. You got to have the conversation with them. My daughter's in 3rd grade. We had that conversation during the summer of last year before she got into the 3rd grade because she was exposed to it. She saw it. It was strange. She's never seen before or paid that much attention to. And as they grow up, they're a little bit more, they see everything. First, somebody in 1st or 2nd grade may not pay that much attention. But when they start to get at a certain age, they start to pay close attention, and they, all of a sudden. So on Friday night, I may even open up the phone lines. I don't know. I don't know if I can. I do have the capability of doing it, but I don't know if I want to go that far with it. Maybe so, maybe yes. I'm thinking that way. You all leave a comment in this video and let me know how you feel, whether or not I should open up the phone lines and get your feedback on that. I think I may want to do that, but let me know how you feel. I'm getting ready to log off. So let me know in the comment section once this video is done and say, yes, open up the phone lines, or, however, so we're going to do that. So that being said, peace to all of you. We'll talk soon. And I'm looking forward for Friday night.